Two girls on fire in a town built of stone. You laugh in the kitchen, I feel it in my bones. You are forbidden on your street, but in my arms you're finally free.
Bronx girl, you learned to walk on this marble floor, learned the name of the cold and the weight of the right silence, but some truths arrive without asking permission and leave you standing only because you don't know how to fall. She told you she would tell you. It wasn't her who told you. And now the park with the snow is just a place that used to exist. I knew before I knew. That's how some things arrive. Not with the crash you spend all your time waiting for. Not with the dramatic scene the brain rehearses on the night sleep won't come. They arrive with a different quality of air in a room you've entered 1,000 times, with a silence that has a different texture from yesterday's silence, with a look that lasts half a second less than it should. I knew on Monday morning, 3 days after the snow-covered park and the chosen kiss, before any word had been said. I knew when I walked into the cafeteria at 7:15 and found Priya already sitting with coffee and the expression of someone who woke up with information she didn't ask for and doesn't know how to deliver. I sat in the chair across from her. "What?" I said. It wasn't a question. Priya put her phone on the table facing me. It was a photo. Taken the previous night, apparently at a private dinner in Boston, published on the society profile of a website that covered New England elite events with that specific mixture of admiration and voyeurism those sites have. The caption read, "Ethan Caldwell and Sloan Whitfield, photographed at the annual Caldwell and Associates dinner. The two have officially confirmed the engagement Senator Whitfield anticipated in September." September, before the hall, before the wine, before the Wednesday library sessions and the archive and Fenwick's and the park and the bronze plaque and the kiss that was chosen. September. I looked at the photo for a time I couldn't measure. Sloan was wearing navy blue, hair down in a way I hadn't seen before. More formal, more constructed, closer to the version of her that existed in institutional photographs than the version that existed at Fenwick's with snow in her hair. Ethan Caldwell was tall, attractive in the way money and private school produce with consistency, and had his arm slightly behind her back in a gesture that was simultaneously possessive and careful. She was smiling. The smile didn't reach her eyes. I handed the phone back to Priya without saying anything. I took a sip of coffee that had gone cold. "Maya," Priya said. "I hear you. You're not okay. I'm processing. That's not the same thing." "I know it's not." Priya was quiet for a moment. And then she said, with that direct gentleness that was her way of saying the important things. She knew since September. The engagement was announced publicly now, but it existed before you arrived on campus. "I know." What Beck said at that party, "I know, Priya." There was something specific about knowing something and then having that something confirmed. It's not the same level of pain, not the same level of shock, but it has its own quality that is almost worse because it doesn't even allow you the surprise as a buffer. You're left with the clean pain, with no other feeling layered on top to divide the weight. I went to argumentative composition. I wrote 2 paragraphs of the final essay during class without paying attention to what the professor was saying. The 2 paragraphs were the best I had written all semester. Anger, I learned early, is a specific kind of fuel. She texted at 10 in the morning. "I need to talk to you today." I looked at the message for a moment in the hallway between buildings, with the December wind doing what December wind in Cambridge does. "I saw the photo," I wrote. The 3 dots appeared immediately. Disappeared, came back. Disappeared again for longer. That's not how I wanted you to find out. How did you want me to find out? In person, with context, with an explanation. I put the phone in my pocket and kept walking. She sent another message at 11. "Maya," and at 11:30, "Please." I didn't respond. Not because I was being cruel. I learned from Grandma G that silence as punishment is a form of cowardice that disguises itself as dignity. I didn't respond because I needed a few hours to arrive at a place where I could have the conversation that needed to be had without everything I was feeling in that moment contaminating what I needed to say. There were things I was feeling that were valid and needed space. And there were things I needed to say that were more important than what I was feeling, and that I couldn't say right while what I was feeling was still in control. So I went to the library. I wrote 8 more pages of the final essay. And at 3 in the afternoon, I sent a message. Bench in front of Whitmore. 4 o'clock. She was there when I arrived. She was sitting on the iron bench with the gray coat and her hands together in her lap. And that expression I had learned over the course of the semester to recognize as hers when there were no longer enough layers of control. To cover what was underneath. I sat on the other end of the bench. There was space between us. Deliberate. Necessary. Talk, I said. She looked at me for a moment. The engagement with Ethan was formalized in August, she said. Direct, without preamble, with the quality of someone who has practiced a sentence enough and decided the only way to say it is to say it. Before the semester started, it was an arrangement my father and his father had been building for 2 years. I agreed because agreeing seemed like the simpler version of a situation I didn't know how to refuse. You agreed to an engagement because it seemed simple. I agreed to an engagement because... She stopped, reorganized, and I recognized in that pause someone wrestling with words that weren't coming out in the right order, because there was a part of me that thought it was what I wanted, or what I should want, and that the two things were the same. And now? Now I know they're not. I looked forward. The snow on Whitmore's lawn had that quality of snow about to turn to ice overnight, slightly hard at the edges, losing its softness. You went to the park with me knowing you were engaged, I said. Yes. You kissed me knowing you were engaged? Yes. And then you said there was something you needed to tell me before someone told me another way. Yes. Why didn't you tell me immediately? She was quiet for a moment. Because I didn't want the park to be about that, she said. And there was something in the raw honesty of that answer that was, at the same time, the most human thing she had ever said and the one that cost me most. I wanted the park to be the park, the kiss to be the kiss, before everything became complicated. Everything was already complicated. You just chose not to let me know how much. She didn't look away. Yes, she said. That's exactly it, I breathed. Sloane. It was the first time I had used her first name like that, with the weight of one person speaking to another, without any of the armor that last names and titles put between words. I understand what it is to be caught between what you owe and what you want. I grew up making decisions within constraints I didn't choose, with resources that weren't enough for all the paths I wanted to take at the same time. I know what that is in a way that's probably different from what you know, but I know the logic. She listened without interrupting. What I don't accept, I continued, is having been placed in a position where I made decisions without information you had and I didn't. You knew about the engagement when you sat at my table for the first time. You knew at the archive. You knew at Fenwick's. You knew in the park. I know. So every time I made a choice about how to get closer to you, I was making that choice without a fundamental piece of data. I know, she said again, and there was something different in that repetition. Not defensive, not argumentative, just the weight of someone who knows they did something that can't be undone and is staying with that weight without trying to redistribute it. Why did you sit at my table? I asked. The original question, which I had asked various times in different forms, but which now had a different context. Because you were the only person in weeks who looked at me like I was a variable, she said. The same answer from the archive. And I was so tired of being treated like a constant. That wasn't fair to me. It wasn't. I'm not an instrument of relief for your complicated life. I know you're not. You needed someone who saw you for real, and I was available, and you didn't. Give me the option to decide whether I wanted to be that person for you, knowing everything. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, something was different. Not just the exhaustion I had seen since the beginning, but something closer to shame. Not the performative shame of someone who wants to be forgiven. The other kind, the harder kind, of someone who recognizes a mistake that has no fix and chooses to stay with it instead of trying to make it smaller. You're right, she said, about everything you said, and I have no argument against any part of it. We were quiet for a while. The wind moved snow from a nearby tree. Ethan knows, I said. It wasn't a question. Ethan knows something changed. He doesn't know specifically what. A pause. He's a good person. That makes it more complicated, not less. What are you going to do? She looked at me. End the engagement, she said, with a clarity that wasn't impulsive. It was the kind of clarity that comes from someone who reached a conclusion by a long road and is saying it out loud for the first time. Not because of you, not entirely. For me, because my mother spent her life trying to teach me the difference between what I owe the family name and what I owe myself, and I listened to her for 18 years and still did exactly what she asked me not to do. That's going to have consequences. I know. Your father. It'll be a difficult conversation. The corner of her mouth, but different from all the previous times. Not controlled, not performative, just real. Probably the hardest I've ever had. And the internship, and the trajectory, and everything that comes with it. She nodded slightly. I know what I'm giving up. I looked at her for a moment. Sloane, ending the engagement doesn't fix what happened between us. I know. You put me in a position I didn't choose to be in. I know. And I need time to process that without you in my peripheral vision waiting for an answer. Something passed across her face. Not unexpected, I noticed. It was as if she had already known this was what I was going to say and had spent the past week preparing to hear it, and the preparation still hadn't been enough. How much time? She said. I don't know. Okay. It might not be. I know. She stood up. She stood in front of me for a moment, with the grey coat and the snow around her, and that quality of someone holding something heavy without letting the weight change their posture. Maya, regardless of what you decide. She stopped, chose her words with that care I had learned to recognize as characteristic of her when what she was saying mattered for real. What I feel wasn't an instrument. It wasn't an escape. It was the most real thing that's happened to me in years, and I ruined it through cowardice. And I'm going to have to live with that. She left. I stayed on the bench looking at the snow on the lawn turning to ice at the edges. I handed in Dr. Carter's final essay on Friday. 15 pages on the legitimization of inequality through institutional narratives of merit, with analysis of the Hollis case and 4 other archive documents, and a conclusion that Dr. Carter would later tell me, with his characteristic economy of words, was the most politically courageous work he had received from a first-year student in his entire career. I received that without knowing exactly what to do with it. Priya took me for hot chocolate at a coffee shop off campus that night, and we sat for 2 hours while she told me about a situation with an ex-boyfriend from Connecticut that had gotten complicated at the beginning of the semester, and which I, absorbed in everything happening around me, hadn't fully noticed. You should have told me, I said. You are dealing with your things. Priya, you spent 3 weeks quietly monitoring me while I processed Sloane Whitfield, and you said nothing about what you were going through. She took a sip of hot chocolate. It seemed like you needed more than I did, she said, with that direct honesty. It doesn't work like that. I know. She looked at me. But you have a way of needing things that makes the people around you want to be enough. I stayed with that for a long time. That's a very strange compliment, I said. It's a very honest one. We left the coffee shop in the December cold, with Cambridge completely inside winter now, without any of the autumn softness that had made the arrival so absurdly beautiful. And there was something in this December Cambridge, harder, more honest, less postcard, that I preferred to the September one, because it was the Cambridge I had earned over a semester of work and contradiction and difficult choices. It was the Cambridge I knew from the inside. The semester ended. I went back to the Bronx on the last day of exams, on a bus that left South Station at 6 in the evening and arrived in New York at 10:30, and I looked out the window as Massachusetts became Connecticut became New York State, and there was something in that movement of retracing the path that had a different weight from any other trip I had taken. I was different, not completely. The fundamental things, the things Mrs. Morrison had seen and Grandma G had shaped and my mother had protected, those were intact. But there were new layers on top, and some old layers that had been tested in ways that left marks, and I was learning that marks aren't necessarily damage. Sometimes they're just evidence that you were somewhere real. Grandma G was in the living room when I arrived, in her chair by the window, with the television program she always watched at 10:30, and which I had memorized without trying over 18 years. She looked at me when I came in, looked for a moment with those eyes that saw more than was reasonable. "You learned something," she said. It wasn't a question. "I did," I said. "Did it cost?" "It cost." "Good." She went back to the television. The things that cost are the only ones that stay. My mother held me in the kitchen for long enough, and she smelled of lavender and coffee and the 2-bedroom apartment that was the only place in the world where I knew exactly who I was without having to calculate anything. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. And this time it was true in a way different from all the previous times I had said that phrase that semester. It was true not because things were simple or resolved or painless. It was true because I was standing, and I knew why. She looked at me with that quality of a mother's look that sees beyond the answer. But she didn't ask anything more. During the 2 weeks of break, I didn't think about Sloane constantly. I thought about her. It would be a lie to say I didn't. It would be the kind of lie I had learned that semester not to allow myself, but with a frequency that had come down from haunting to presence, the kind you learn to inhabit instead of fight. I worked the lunch shift at the cafeteria where I had worked since junior year. The manager, Marcus, mid-40s, who had watched me grow from a high school student with too many notebooks in her bag to a university student on a full scholarship, asked how university was going with that mixture of pride and genuine curiosity of someone who has invested in the idea that someone they know is going far. "Hard," I said. "Hard how?" "Hard like a place that was built to remind me I don't belong there. But that also ended up showing me that belonging is something you do, not something you receive." Marcus looked at me for a moment. "Is that the kind of thing you write in an essay or the kind of thing you actually discovered?" "Both," I said. He nodded with the weight of someone recognizing a real achievement. Grandma G, that same week, gave me a book as a gift. No wrapping, no ceremony. Just the book placed on my bed one morning, as if it had always been there. It was an old edition of The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, with annotations in the margins in a handwriting I didn't recognize. "Whose annotations are these?" I asked. "Mine," she said from the chair by the window, without turning. I looked at the book, looked at the annotations, small, dense, sometimes a single word, sometimes a full sentence in response to the text. "You read this?" "When I was your age." A pause. 3 times. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened to the first page. There is a strange feeling of always looking at yourself through the eyes of others. Grandma G had underlined the sentence and written in the margin, in a handwriting from 60 years ago. The question is deciding when that matters and when it doesn't. I stared at that annotation for a long time. Then I started reading. The message arrived the night before my return to Harwick, not from Sloane. It was from a number I didn't recognize, with a Boston area code, and said only, "You don't know who I am, but I need you to know something before you go back to campus. Call me when you can. See." I looked at the message for a long time. Then I texted Priya asking if she knew who a Boston number with the initial C might be that had my contact. Priya's response took longer than usual. When it came, it said only, "I don't know." "But Maya, call." I called. The voice that answered was female. Older, with that quality of certain Boston voices that carry the city's accent without letting it dominate. Discreet, articulate, with the weight of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions with cordiality. "Maya Reeves?" "Yes." "My name is Catherine Whitfield. I'm Sloane's aunt." I went completely still. "I know this seems invasive," she continued, with the tone of someone who knows what they're doing is irregular and chose to do it anyway. "And I understand if you don't want to have this conversation, but there's something you need to know. And Sloane won't tell you because she doesn't know I know, and because she currently doesn't have access to her own phone." "No access?" "Her father took her phone when she communicated her decision to end the engagement with Ethan." A pause. "That was 5 days ago. She's at home in Beacon Hill, and the semester starts in 2 days, and my brother is using the break to try to reverse a decision she made with more clarity than I've seen her make anything since her mother died. I processed that." "Why are you calling me?" "Because she told me about you. Not everything. Sloane is careful about what she shares, but enough. And because I've known my niece since she was born, and I know the difference between her being stubborn and her being brave, and what is happening in that house in Beacon Hill is the second thing." A pause. "And because she has been alone in a room with her own thoughts for 5 days. Without her phone, without you, with my brother using every tool a lifetime of political power teaches you to use. What do you want me to do?" The question was honest. I didn't know what was possible to do, what was my role to do, what I wanted to do. Those were 3 different sets of questions that needed different answers. "Nothing immediate," Catherine Whitfield said. "Just know. So that when she appears on campus in 2 days, and she will appear because Sloane Whitfield doesn't let her father or anyone else win when she has decided she's going to do something, she'll appear carrying the weight of those 5 days, and she'll need someone who knows that." I was quiet for a moment. "Why do you trust that I'm that person?" A pause. "Because my niece spent 17 years on that campus being exactly what that campus expected her to be," said Catherine. "And then she met you, and spent a semester being, by the accounts I have, gradually more herself than she had been since her mother died." Another pause, shorter. "You don't have to be the person who fixes everything. You just have to be the one who's there." The call ended. I sat on the edge of the bed in the Bronx apartment with the phone in my hand and the voice of a woman I had never seen still in my ear. And outside there was the sound of the grand concourse, which was the sound of my whole life, and in my hand was the weight of information I hadn't asked for, and which arrived anyway. Grandma G appeared in the bedroom doorway. She looked at me. "Problem?" She said. "Situation," I said. "What's the difference?" "A problem is something you solve. A situation is something you go through." She looked at me for a long moment with those 82 years of calibrated gaze. "Then go through it," she said, and went back to her chair by the window. I arrived at Harwick on the morning of the first day of the second semester. The campus was different in January Cambridge, more bare, more honest, without the seductive beauty of autumn or the decorative magic of the first snow. It was the campus in its most real version, with the serious cold and the white sky and that quality of beginning that is also a continuation. Priya was in the room when I arrived, and she hugged me without saying anything, and that was exactly right. I unpacked in silence. At 2 in the afternoon, I went to the library, not because I was waiting for someone. I went because it was where I studied, because the semester had begun, because life at Harwick had a rhythm that existed independently of anything happening inside it. I took my table, opened my laptop. At 3:20, I heard a chair being pulled out on the other side of the table. I didn't look up immediately. I finished the paragraph I was reading. I looked up. Sloane Whitfield was on the other side of the table with a backpack, without the laptop this time, and there was something different in her face that took me a moment to name. Not the exhaustion I had learned to identify as the underneath layer of control. It was something after the exhaustion, the expression of someone who went through something difficult and came out the other side not intact, but standing. There was a small scratch on the right side of her chin that hadn't been there before the break. I looked at the scratch. She noticed I had noticed. "I fell on the ice at the house entrance," she said. "The day I left." "When did you leave?" "Yesterday morning." A pause. "My father didn't give me my phone back. I used the neighbor's landline to call a cab." I stayed with that image for a moment. Sloane Whitfield, senator's daughter, third generation at Hawick, asking the neighbor's landline to call a cab and escape the Beacon Hill house with her chin scratched from a fall on the ice. "Your aunt called me," I said. Something passed across her face, not exactly surprise, closer to affectionate resignation. "Catherine," she said. "Of course she did. She told me what happened in those 5 days. It wasn't pleasant. It didn't sound like it." She looked at me for a moment. "I ended the engagement," she said. "Officially, completely, with all the consequences that has." A pause. "Not because you said you needed time, not to win you back, because it was the right thing and I was waiting to have enough courage, and apparently I needed to go through all of this to find out I had it." "I know," I said. "Your aunt told me that too." "My aunt is someone who interferes with good intentions on a consistent basis." "I liked her." The corner of Sloane's mouth moved. I looked at that movement, that gesture that had started as a shadow of a smile and had become, over the course of a semester, one of the things I had most learned to read. "Sloane," I said. "Yes." "I spent the break thinking about what your aunt said, and about what you said on the Whitmore bench, and about what I said, and what you did, and what I feel, and what's fair and what isn't." I paused. "And I arrived at a conclusion that is incomplete, and that will probably cost me things I can't yet predict." She listened without interrupting, without the anxious look of someone who needs the answer to be able to breathe. Just listening, like someone who had learned in these last months that some things need to arrive at their own pace. "I don't fully trust you yet," I said. "And I don't know how long that will take. And there's a real probability that this campus, with all its Bex Harrisons and senators' dinners and already mapped trajectories, will make this harder than either of us is imagining right now." "I know that." "And still," I said, "you are the only variable that appeared in my semester that I can't file away." She went very still. "Is that a yes?" she said, her voice lower than usual, more real. "It's a beginning," I said, "which is different, and which is, given everything, much more honest." She nodded, opened the backpack, took out the laptop, put it on the table with that efficiency of movement I had learned to recognize as characteristic of her. I went back to my text. The silence that settled was the functional kind, two sets of attention coexisting without collision, the kind I had known since the first Wednesdays of October. But it was different now. It was the silence of two people who know what exists between them, who also know what still needs to be built, and who chose, in this specific moment of this January afternoon in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to begin. At 5:15, without either of us having said anything for more than 2 hours, Sloane placed on the table, without looking at me, a folded piece of paper. I looked at the paper. "What's this?" "Read it," she said. I unfolded it. It was a letter, written by hand with that handwriting I had seen on archive documents, and which I now recognized as hers. Short, 8 lines, but with the specific weight of something that took a very long time to arrive at 8 lines. It said, "Maya, I know a beginning isn't the same as a guarantee. I know you have reasons to be careful that exist independently of me, but I want you to know, in a way that can't be misinterpreted, that the person you saw in the park, without the right blazer and with snow in her hair and with my mother's plaque behind us, that is the only version of me that matters. Everything else is performance. You are the first person in years who knew how to tell the difference. I'm not going to waste that. S." I folded the letter back, put it in the pocket of my coat, went back to the text, and said nothing, because some answers don't need words, and some things are more true when you let them exist in silence for a while, before putting language on top of them. But when we left the library at 6 in the evening and the January Cambridge cold arrived at both of us at the same time, and our arms touched lightly in the unplanned gesture of 2 people walking together in a narrow space, neither of us pulled back, and that, I found, was enough for now. Enough and real and chosen, which was, in the end, everything I had learned at Harwick that was worth being. 3 weeks later, on a February afternoon with fresh snow and the campus still learning the rhythm of the second semester, I was in Dr. Carter's class when he handed back the previous semester's final essays. On mine, there was a note at the bottom of the last page, in that economical handwriting I had learned to recognize as the equivalent of an elaborate compliment from anyone else. "Reeves, this essay has been submitted to the Harwick Journal of Political Theory. With your permission, we will publish it in the spring edition. Come speak with me this week." Carter. I stared at that sentence. Then I looked forward to where Dr. Carter was already moving on to the next topic with the energy of someone who distributes life-changing moments between one sentence and the next without ceremony. Beside me, Sloane was reading her own comments with that concentration she gave to things that mattered. She felt my look, turned her head. I tilted the essay slightly toward her so she could read Dr. Carter's note. She read it. And then she looked at me in a way that was different from all the previous looks, not the evaluating look, not the look that asked who I was in a room full of people. It was the look of someone who knew the answer to that question and was glad about what they knew. Dr. Carter was talking about structures of power legitimization in the 19th century. I turned forward and started writing. And there was, in the specific quality of that moment, the warm room, the cold outside, the essay in my hand, the look that had stayed even after she had already looked away, something that felt, for the first time since I had arrived at Harwick with a $40 backpack and a set of rules, not like belonging to a place, but like belonging to myself inside it, which was, I was discovering now, so much more. But 3 days later, on a Thursday morning, I found an envelope in my campus mailbox. No stamp, no return address, slipped in by hand. Inside was a single sheet of Harwick University letterhead. I read it standing in the mailroom with my coat still on and my backpack on one shoulder, and the February cold not yet gone from my face. It was a formal notice from the Office of Financial Aid. It said that my scholarship, the full scholarship, the one that covered everything, the one that had arrived in a white envelope with a gold crest and had made my mother drop to one knee in the middle of the kitchen and had made Grandma G say, of course it was without turning her head, was under review, pending investigation of academic conduct, effective immediately. I read the letter twice, then I folded it carefully, put it in my coat pocket, next to Sloane's letter with the 8 lines and the signature S, and I walked out of the mailroom into the February snow with the specific steadiness of someone who has been hit and has decided, before the pain has finished arriving, that they are not going to fall. Because Grandma G taught me that, because my mother taught me that, because I had come too far and learned too much and built too much inside these stone walls to let someone else's move be the last one. There was a name at the bottom of the formal notice. In the line marked "Reported by," the name was Elizabeth Harrison. I stood in the February snow for exactly 10 seconds. Then I took out my phone and I called Catherine Whitfield.